Morning, everybody. Beautiful May morning. We're thankful for your presence today. I have one quick announcement that I wrote on my hand so I wouldn't forget. Do remember we had several prayer requests and several people need our prayers. They're all written down, but there was one that we need to add to that, and that is our elder Bill Whittington. He'll have surgery in Jonesboro on Thursday, so please pray for him throughout the week, and then, of course, on Thursday itself, if you can remember to say a special prayer as well. Is that Thursday morning? Thursday morning. So when you get up in the morning on Thursday, whisper a prayer for Bill on that occasion. Are you thankful to be here this morning? Are you thankful for the cross this morning? I very much appreciate all the songs that we sang on this Lord's Day morning. In particular, the song before the Lord's Supper, Jesus, Keep Me Near the Cross. I always love that song. And then, of course, we just sang, He Gave Me a Song, which doesn't use the word cross, but it is because of the cross that we have the happiness that we have. It is because of the cross that we have the joy that's in our hearts. It's because of the cross that we don't feel the anguish and the hardship of sin, but rather we get to enjoy the exuberance of salvation. He gave us that song because He suffered so horribly on the cross. I'll give you just 10 seconds of background about the sermon this morning. I had the idea for this in response to, it's been several weeks now, but the tornadoes and everything that came through this part of the state that so totally devastated so many people. I think we made the fair assumption that just about everybody in this congregation either was impacted or knows someone directly who was impacted by all those storms that came through in wrecked Cave City and everywhere around. And of course, that's not relatively a new thing. Major storms and things like that have happened over and over for thousands of years. Where I'm from, Central Arkansas, not far from where I grew up, is Valonia, and Valonia, Arkansas, had tornadoes come through. It seemed like every 2 years there was a major tornado that went through there for like a 10-year stretch. It was constantly being devastated by major storms, similar to what we suffered here several weeks ago. It is common when big calamities and catastrophes like that happen. It is common when your world is rocked and turned upside down in all the worst ways you can imagine. It is very common when you suffer either a personal tragedy, a family tragedy, or a community tragedy, or even a national one, something like that, that you will hear people in real time try to make sense of it. And you hear them express their thoughts when perhaps they might otherwise be reserved. They will almost by compulsion feel the need to want to talk about what they're experiencing to try to help their brains process something that is so humongous and surreal as I had a house and now I don't have a house. I had a child and now I don't have a child. Or I had a mother and I don't have a mother. Or I had a healthy body and now I have a cancer-stricken body. Whatever it may be, they need to work out within themselves what is going on. How do I make sense of it? How do I process it? And that is perfectly fine and healthy. But sometimes, in the middle of that process, people might, it's not a conclusion because it's a process and they're in the middle of it, but they might latch on to an idea that is not accurate. They might come to believe that this terrible thing that has happened to them is happening to them because God is directly trying to hurt them, or that God is inflicting this pain on them without any sense of discipline, without any sense of, I have an eternal plan. And they have no concept of that or appreciation for that. They just see God as Zeus just throwing a lightning bolt at them for no reason or rhyme whatsoever. And they lash out at God. And they attack God. And they say it is God's fault that this happened. If God, and this is what you hear a lot of atheists and critics will say, if God was a loving God, why? And then there's a blank, and you can fill in the blank with any bad thing ever. And I don't discount the badness of all those bad things. But I would quibble with the implication that God is not a loving God because those bad things happen. And in fact, I think the root of that statement is simply a misunderstanding of what you mean or what God means when He calls Himself a loving God. And our definition of that is sometimes a bit too short-sighted, and not just in terms of time, but in terms of perspective, because God is supreme, and God's perspective is eternally vast, and ours, by necessity of us being human beings, is much smaller. And so we don't always understand what we call the grand scheme of things. And sometimes, as hard as it is to say, there isn't always a grand scheme of things. Sometimes there is no purpose behind the tornado other than just weather happened. And that itself is hard for us to wrap our minds around. And so we need something to wrap our hand around and to shake it vigorously and point a finger at and blame And quite frequently, God becomes the object of our blame. And so the sermon this morning is very simple. I'm going to share with you 3 statements that you will hear. And perhaps these are things that you've said or thought or something similar to them. If so, I'm not preaching this to you, at least by intent. All of us at one time or another maybe have had this thought, even if it was just a passing one, a fleeting one, momentary, or something like it, or we've heard someone who said it. This is not to criticize necessarily anyone who's ever thought anything like this, because again, you're in the middle of a grieving process. You're not thinking straight. You're not thinking clearly. You're grasping at any straw you can to try to make sense of your now shattered world. We all understand that. Nevertheless, sometimes those thoughts persist and they take root and they drive someone away from God. And so these are 3 things people say about God in the midst of those hard times that are not true. 3 things, each one of which, not every single one of them is going to be said by the same person. It's going to be, each one is different based on where a person is relative to the bad thing that's happened. In the middle of it, after it, just before it, they may have these kinds of thoughts based on their perception of the world around them. And then when something happens or is happening or has happened, it almost reinforces. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So let's dig into them. Very short, very simple this morning. First one is this: He doesn't care. This is what you say, maybe not you. This is what somebody may say when they're in the middle of it, when they're going through it, when they're standing in the wreckage of the destroyed house, when they're standing at the graveside of the lost parent, when they are sitting in the doctor's office and they're giving you the news of what your diagnosis is, what you're now going to be suffering with for the next several years, potentially. And you're in the middle of that crisis, and your brain is swimming with explanations, trying to find something you can latch onto to say, this is why. And in the middle of all that mess, well, it's because God doesn't care about me, someone may say. It's because God isn't thinking about me anymore. God isn't interested in me anymore. God is detached from me now. And of course that must be true, because if God was still interested in me, God would never let this happen to me, is the connection and the conclusion that people will draw from that. It is not a new complaint against the Lord. So take your minds back to the Exodus. Israel has been freed from bondage. That just happened. They have come to the edge of the Red Sea, and they're looking at their prospects ahead of them, and it's not looking good, and they lash out because they perceive they're about to die. And so they say, Exodus 14:11, they said to Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you done with us like this to carry us out of Egypt? Isn't this the word that we told you in Egypt, saying, leave us alone so we can serve the Egyptians? It would be better for us to serve them than to die in the wilderness. The implication, the accusation in the implication of their question is, God is taking us out here to die. That's not even a question in their mind. That's the assumption that God isn't going to just let us die in Egypt, but rather He's taking us all the way out here to die in the wilderness, and we just want to complain about it. We just want to say, why has God abandoned us? Why is God forgetting about us? Why doesn't God care about us? That we're out here and we're calling out to Him and crying out to Him. Never mind the fact that one day ago, less than, they were experiencing their great Passover and Exodus beginning. God clearly cared, but they stub their toe once, and they throw up their hands and say, well, I guess He doesn't care about us anymore. And that's not the last time they say something like that. Exodus 16, verse 3. The children of Israel said to them, would to God that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by pots full of meat, and we ate bread to the fullness. For you have brought us into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Previously, they're saying that at the edge of the Red Sea. And then what does God do but split the Red Sea? Because He cares. They cross the Red Sea, their bellies ache a little bit, they growl with hunger, and they throw up their hands. Oh, we could all go back to Egypt, because God clearly doesn't care about us anymore. If you'll just wait 5 minutes, God will make birds rain from the sky. God will make bread seep up from the ground. If you'll just wait, God will protect you and God will provide for you. But we are so quick in our short-term thinking to think this calamity means God is gone. God is done. God isn't interested in us anymore. He's moved on from us, and He's just left us out here into the wilderness of life, there for them literally, but for us metaphorically. And then again, Exodus 17, 2 and 3. The people chided with Moses and said, "Give us water that we may drink." And Moses said, "What are you chiding with me for? Why are you testing the Lord?" And they thirsted for water, and they murmured against Moses, and they said, "This is why you brought us out of Egypt, to kill us and our children and cattle with thirst?" It's the same as the other one. It's just thirsty instead of hungry, because it has to be different, because when they were complaining about their hunger, he fed them. And instead of learning the lesson, now they're parched, and their stomach's not growling, but they're a little parched, a little dry. And so they want to say, "Well, oh my God doesn't care anymore. God's abandoned us," like worse than toddlers. God has just rejected us. God has walked away from us. He's dragged us out of Egypt to kill us out here, which when you stop and think about how ridiculous that sounds, you can't help but laugh, but you shouldn't laugh, because it's a symptom of the same problem that affects people today. You don't think clearly, you say irrational things. They weren't thinking clearly, because clearly, God, if he wanted to kill you, could have killed you in Egypt. It would have been a lot less work than to bring you all the way out here just to kill you out here. That makes no sense. If anything, that's just spitefulness, and that's not in the character of God. But they're not thinking clearly. They're not able to zoom out and consider their lot in life from a neutral perspective. They're in the middle of a crisis. They're starving, they think, to death. They're not, but they think they are. When we get in a crisis, when we have a hardship that is humongous, bigger than we can fathom, we don't think clearly. And we lash out. And we lash out at anything we can get our hands around to try to make sense of it. And it's easy and convenient to say it must be because God doesn't care. Why is that easy and convenient? Because otherwise, we have to say God does care, and I'm still suffering. And that's harder for us to wrestle with. It's harder for us in our small brains, me too, small brains, to come to terms with the reality, the fact that God, it is possible for God to still care about me even while I'm in the midst of suffering. That's a fact. I will remind you what God said to Moses before all of the previous verses in Exodus 3, speaking from the bush. He said, "I have seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard the cry by reason of their taskmasters, and I know their sorrows." He goes on to say, "I'm come down so that you can go and bring them home, bring them back to Canaan." They assumed, and I know they say this later, but it's coming from somewhere within them. They believed it. They assumed God had given up on them, that God no longer cared about them. But you look at the things that he says to Moses, and you don't get that impression. "I know it. I've heard it. I felt it. I've seen it. I care. Their backs are breaking against their taskmasters. My heart is breaking." Well then, God, why aren't you doing something about it then? Well, I'm going to do something about it when I'm ready to do something about it. You need to learn patience. Because sometimes when you're in a hardship, just wait. Just wait. And the God who brings good blessings will provide you with something good. And it will not necessarily make the bad thing better, but it will hopefully be so good that you'll have some perspective, and you'll be able to say, God eventually came through in his own time. I just needed to trust him and wait on the Lord, because he does care about me. And I may be hurting in the moment, and it may feel like he doesn't, but God has his own timetable, because God is not a human being. God is not a person with a small, short-term mindset. God has a bigger picture. God has a plan. God will come through in one way or another. Blessings will come in one time or another, and when they do, they will be so great that the hardship that you suffered will feel slight in comparison. Now, that's not much comfort to you. We're in the middle of it, but that's the perspective you'll eventually gain. He does care. Second criticism, he has forgotten me. Now, this is very similar to the first one, but I'm going to frame it differently. You will have people say this and think this and believe this before the calamity strikes, before the tornado takes their house, before their spouse is stricken with cancer, before whatever. They will have other things that have happened to them, a bunch of smaller little things, seemingly manageable things, they will have piled up and compounded on their life till they come to the conclusion that I no longer have a relationship with God, and he no longer has one with me. And they'll have that idea already built into their mind so that when the big thing happens, it will reinforce their prior belief. Aha, see, I knew it. I knew God didn't care. I knew God wasn't listening. I knew God had forgotten, because look, here I am suffering. Same conclusion as before, but it comes from a different place. When I was preaching at Higdon, right after I arrived, I was still a very young, inexperienced preacher. And I'm still not good with people. I don't like half of them I meet. I'm still not good with people. But especially back then, I was terrible with people. I was not a good conversationalist, even worse than now, if you can imagine it. But I had heard there was a guy who was a little bit older, who used to worship there all the time and had quit coming. Just kind of tapered off and stopped attending. It wasn't poor health or anything like that, just quit. So I took it upon myself to go visit him. And I don't even remember who it was, okay? But I remember the conversation. I remember what he said. It has stuck with me for years now. This is over 10 years now. He said, God and I came to an understanding a long time ago. I don't talk to him and he doesn't talk to me. I don't have anything to do with him and he doesn't have anything to do with me. I moved on from him and he's moved on from me. Now, I was too cowardly and inexperienced and anything similar to those things to say this to him then, but if that's something that you've thought today, then let me tell you, you did not hear that from God. You heard that from the devil. If you believe, listen, it's a one-way road though. You may have forgotten about God. You may no longer care about God. You may not be interested in God. You may not want to listen to God. You may not want to talk to God, but God is still interested in you. God still wants to talk to you. God still wants to hear from you. God still wants to care for you. God still wants to bless you and provide for you and be your Father in heaven. He still wants those things, but if you walk away from him, he's not going to come running after you, begging, pleading and crying and saying, please come, please, I'll do anything you say. He's not going to chase you. He is sovereign, sitting on his throne, and he will send prophet after prophet, and he will send preacher after preacher, but you must come to him because he has not forgotten you. But that man's idea, I never forgot that. And every time something like this happens, what happened to Cave City or something, you hear about somebody suffering calamity, I sometimes will think about that person whose name I can't even remember now, whose face I really can't even see anymore. And I'll think he's going to have calamities like everyone does. He's going to have hardships like everyone does. But for him, because he will go into them with the belief that God has already forgotten him, it will just reinforce that belief. And it will make it that much harder to reach him. And that's a great tragedy. But his belief about God is not a new one. It's a very old one. To go back to Israel, Psalm 13, 1 and 2. How long, O Lord, will you forget me? And there should be a question mark there on the screen behind me. Because it's an implied question with an answer that's implied. Forever? Again, it implies you have forgotten me. I just want to know how long this is going to go on. How long are you going to keep forsaking me? How long are you going to stop hearing my pleas? How long is my enemy going to keep triumphing over me? How long is this going to happen? Because clearly it's happening because you don't care about me anymore. It's clearly happening because you've forgotten about me. You've moved on to somebody else. You love somebody else, etc. How long is this going to keep happening? Who says it is? You're assuming it is. One more and then we'll tie this up. Isaiah 49, 14. Zion says, this is the Lord speaking, but he's knowing their thoughts. He's throwing them back at them. Zion says, the Lord has forsaken me. The Lord has forgotten me. Zion, the hill, the actual place, being besieged by Babylon, being starved to death, suffering unimaginable tragedy on a national level. The whole people are in the midst of turmoil. And so they cry out, not for help, but to complain. And they say, God has forsaken us. God has abandoned us. God has forgotten us. Why? Why will you do that? Why have you? Never mind all the thousands of idol groves between Babylon and Israel that you erected, you Israelite pagans, but they want to know, why have you forgotten us? He hasn't forgotten them. They forgot him, but he hasn't forgotten them. Here's the answer to that. Let's go back to what we read a minute ago. You have the people of God assuming that God has abandoned them. The people of God assuming that God has forsaken them. They go through a hardship and they throw up their hands and they say, God is not interested in us anymore. God doesn't care about us anymore. In the New Testament time, when Christianity started to blossom and bloom in Gentile communities, Paul writes the Roman letter, and he perceives, himself being a Jew, how his fellow national brethren are struggling with this, seeing Gentiles come into the fold of fellowship with God. And many of them, in keeping with their ancestral tradition, throw up their hands and say, well, I guess God doesn't love us anymore. Well, I guess God no longer cares about us anymore. God has forgotten about us, and he's moved on to his new love, which is the Gentiles. And Paul has to say, has God abandoned his people? Has God forsaken his people? Does God want nothing to do with his people anymore? No, that's not the case. God forbid, perish the thought. I'm an Israelite, Paul says. I'm the descendant of Abraham. I'm of the tribe of Benjamin. God has not abandoned his people. God selected them and pre-selected them and desired to have a relationship with them from before there was an Israel nation. He has not abandoned you. Perhaps you have abandoned him. Maybe you've abandoned his Messiah, or back in the Old Testament, maybe you've rejected him for idol gods. But he hasn't abandoned you. He's been right where he's always been. The problem is, we assume and we think God's abandoned us. Maybe because we've sinned so much already, he's not going to pay attention to us anymore, and so we turn away from him. But if you will just turn back, he's right there. His arms are open. He's ready to receive you. Lamentations 3, 22 and 23. We read Lamentations 5:20. Why do you forget us? Why do you forsake us? But Lamentations 3, from the Lord's own mouth, or spoken about the Lord, paints a different picture. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. Now, this is not a translation, but it's an application. It's applicable. The steadfast love of the Lord never forgets. The steadfast love of the Lord never abandons. The steadfast love of the Lord never forsakes. The steadfast love of the Lord is a constant waterfall, just constantly flowing. Niagara Falls, thousands upon thousands of gallons of water being dumped constantly, and yet it never runs dry because it's constantly fed by Lake Erie and by the natural water cycle. It's constantly pouring water. Even greater and more reliable than that is the fountain of love which God pours out. It will never run out. It will never run dry. The steadfast love of the Lord does not stop. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. So you go to bed thinking God has forgotten you, and maybe you'll wake up forgetting God, but God will not have forgotten you. God's love for you will be just as true then as it was when you went to bed. And then finally, Isaiah 49. We already read the beginning of it, 49:14. Zion says, "The Lord has forsaken me, the Lord has forgotten me." And God says, "Oh, really? Can a woman, a mother, forget her nursing child so she would have no compassion on the son of her womb? Can a mother stop loving her child?" Now, the Lord knows the answer is a very small percentage. Yes, it is possible, because he says even a mother can. It's rare, it's unnatural, but it happens. That a mother falls out of love or never loves, or even before the child is born decides doesn't want. Those things happen. It's a small percentage, because usually it's instinctive, it's built in. A mother's love for her child is inherent. But even then it happens, and yet God says, "Yet I will never." It's a 0 percentage. It will never happen. I will never abort you. I will never abandon you. I will never forsake you. I will never stop loving you. And when you come to me for nourishment, I will always provide for you. 0% chance that I will ever stop. Yet I will never forget you. So if that's your attitude now, pre-calamity, shed that attitude. Because even though he will not forget you, you may still suffer. You may still have hardships. You may still have bad days. Your house may get blown away. Your loved one may die. You might get stricken with a disease. And yet you will go into those with the belief, the assurance, the conviction, yet the Lord has not forgotten me. And so therefore I will be okay. One way or another, however it may come, I will be okay. Last one. He did this to me. He did this to me. This is days, weeks, months after the calamity. You look back on it. You're still trying to pick up the pieces, because it takes time to rebuild a disaster-stripped home or community. It takes time to pick up the pieces of your life. When you're given a prognosis, a short term in your life, and you spend perilous months just fretting over it, and you feel like after that period is over, I've just wasted a quarter of the time that they told me I had left. Those things snowball. And then you start looking for someone to blame. And you get out of convenience and misplaced frustration, we point a finger at the heavens and we say, "He did this to me." Now let's be clear. Every good thing is from above, James 1. If it is good that happens to you, if it is a blessing that happens to you, it is never, ever the devil who did it. Never does the devil give you something that is truly good. You may think it's good, it may be sweet like candy, but it's poison in the end. So let's get the distinction out of the way. If it's genuinely and truly a good blessing, it always comes from God. If it's bad, well, we have to define bad. Because if it's bad because I did bad and I'm learning a lesson, The devil's not doing that. That's discipline. And my Father's the teacher, and I'm his disciple. So I must be discipled. I must be disciplined. So he'll discipline me. If I do bad, and I suffer the consequences for it, it's fine to say, God is teaching me a lesson. It's not so fine when you're suffering the consequences to say, in a vague term, God has a plan and it's going to be okay. Because what you're kind of implying when you say that is that you're an innocent victim and that you're just kind of trusting in the Lord to get you through this hardship, and you're misplacing your guilt to someone's house burned down, but I trust in the Lord. And like Michael Vick, this is a long time ago now, and these words are just spewing out of me. I'm not even thinking where they came from. But I remember the dog fighting scandal with Michael Vick several years ago. First public statement he makes after he's arrested and convicted, he's going to spend time in prison, is, God has a plan. Okay, no, your first words need to be, I did wrong and I'm sorry. And then your next words need to be, and God is punishing me. But you don't get to say God has a plan in big, vague, general, sweet terms as if I'm just suffering and God is trying to teach me a lesson. No. The lesson is you're spending time in jail because you were fighting dogs. Let's get the nuance particularly there, okay? Now that's all side, I didn't even write that down. That's all sidebar. The point is, we look for someone to blame, and we think if it's bad, it must be God is attacking me. But I don't want you to run the opposite direction and say if it's bad, it's always Satan. Because it's not always Satan if it's bad. If you did bad and you're learning a lesson, that's God. If something bad happened to you and something good can come from it, the good that comes from it is God. Something bad that happens to you sometimes is the devil. And we need to learn where to put the accusatory finger. Sometimes it has to go at his heinous face. And Job is your example for this. So let's start with Eliphaz, who makes this audacious statement. Job 4, verses 7 through 9. Remember, he says to Job, I pray, who ever perished being innocent? Or when were the righteous ever cut off? Now that is the most entitled, pampered, privileged thing that you will read, I think, in your entire Bible. That's the kind of statement made by somebody who has never had a bad day. That's the kind of statement made by somebody who has had everything always handed to them, who's never had to struggle, who's never had to suffer, who's never had a setback, who believes I'm good and good has always happened to me, therefore if you're bad, God is doing it to you. That's the baseline 100% is what Eliphaz says. Because whoever perished being innocent? I don't know, Abel, the first person ever to perish, being innocent? I guess he didn't read that or know that or hadn't heard that from his grandfather or something like that. Yes, innocent people suffer. Yes, hardships happen. And that in itself doesn't imply that you're not innocent. In other words, it doesn't imply that God is punishing you. You don't therefore get to say as a blanket statement, if something bad happens, God is doing this to you, because he's not always. Keep going in Job. I'll actually go back earlier in Job, Job 1:21. Even Job himself makes the famous statement. I came out of my mother's womb naked, I'll return to the earth naked. The Lord gave, the Lord takes away. Now there's a lot of nuance there, because as we'll see in just a second, it was God. God is sovereign. Everything that happens must happen at least by God's allowance, God's permissive will, right? God must at least allow something. But just because God allows it doesn't mean he's doing it. One is passive, one is active. But Job believes actively God is taking these things away from me, my health, my family, my reputation, etc. That God is taking these things away. The Lord gave me, and the Lord has taken them away. Only one of those is always true. If it's good, the Lord did give. It's not always true that the Lord took away. Now, you can argue, well, maybe Job is thinking with bigger, more philosophical perspectives. No, he is not. He spends the whole rest of the book frustrated with God, lashing out without going to the point of sin, but still frustrated because he believes I'm being punished for something I haven't done. And he hadn't done anything wrong. Therefore, his conclusion should have been, so I'm not being punished. There must be someone else at work. And there was someone else at work. The devil went to the Lord. And the devil accused God of playing favorites and of shielding Job from hard things. And so God says, okay, Job does not need good things to be faithful. So attack him. Give Satan allowance. Give Satan permission. And you know, ultimately, at the end of the day, God giving Satan permission to hurt Job is the same as him giving us free will to hurt each other. And that doesn't mean it's okay, that he's okay with it. When I slap you across the face, or if I murder you, or if I sin against the Lord who gave me that free will, God is not making me do that. God is not doing that. I did that. God gave me free will. God gave the devil allowance. And the devil ran with it. He persecuted Job, and he hurt Job. And Job and all of Job's friends said, well, God is doing it. Let's try to figure out why. And the real culprit was the devil. Well, I know God says, well, you incited me against Job, but all the Lord means, based on the context, is you brought this to me and I allowed you to do this to Job. It was the devil who killed Job's children. God gave them to him. Good thing. The devil took them away. Bad thing. God gave more children to Job. Good thing. Comes from God. But the bad thing in the middle came from Satan. And at no point in the middle of that ordeal did Job have the right to say, God did this to me. No. And you don't get to say, well, he allows everything, because then what are we even talking about? He allows everything then, so that doesn't matter. The devil attacks. The devil hurts. The devil tries to drive you away from God, and the devil laughs with sadistic glee every time you say, God! Because it is not God's fault when your house burns down. It is not God's fault when cancer strikes your loved one. It is not God's fault when you have someone close to you who dies at a far too young age. It is not God's fault. There was no death in Eden. There were no tornadoes in Eden. There was no cancer in Eden. We walked away from paradise because we listened to the devil. And he has continued to lie to us and tell us God did this to you, because God doesn't care about you and God has forgotten about you. So just forget about him. And that's a lie. God does care. God does love you. God is with you through the storm. Job lost everything. God gave it back to him. He still had to lose everything. You'll have suffering, you'll have hardship. On the other side is still going to be God. And if you stay faithful to him, blessings will follow. If anything, I hope you get from this sermon, I understand how hard it is to go in the middle of a hardship. And it's arrogant and entitled for me to say, have some perspective, have some patience, because I'm not the one going through it. But that is the Bible's lesson. Try and zoom out. Go through the process of grief and see the Lord is still there, that he loves you, that he hasn't forgotten you, and that he is with you, not against you. If you're here and you're not a Christian, the Lord is on your side, wanting you to be saved. The Lord is not wanting you to perish, but wants you to come to repentance. So repent. Bury your sins that separated you from God in the watery grave and rise to walk in newness of life. If you have become a Christian, but since then calamity has struck and you feel pulled away from God, well, who do you think wants you to pull away from God? Come back to the Lord. Frustrate the devil. Let your brothers and sisters celebrate with you in your restoration. If you have a need, please make it known right now. Come as we stand and sing.